Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 116 of Humanity Rising. As most of you know, Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 320 partnering organizations from all over the world that arose out of the pandemic as really an offering to people of goodwill everywhere, and a capacity to come together to share our experiences of what it's like going through this pandemic, to share solutions and to confer on how we can enhance our strategic effectiveness as the progressive movement, as people working for a better world, so that we can ensure that the world beyond the pandemic is more sustainable and healthy and resilient and in alignment with natural systems. The pandemic, which really began at the beginning of the year and then spread, and then by early March had put most of the world in lockdown. Economies were brought virtually to a standstill, and people were mandated to engage in social distancing. It was initially thought that this might be over by spring, and that with clear public health observations and rigor, that the pandemic would go away. It has not. And now the world is splitting. In Europe, where I am, I happen to be in Amsterdam. The Dutch government announced last night that as of 10 p.m. Central European time today, restaurants and cafes will be closed to the public, and only takeout orders will be allowed. Only essential travel will be allowed within Netherlands. Groups of more than 4 are being temporarily banned. And people are mandated now to wear masks indoors and as much as possible outdoors. The UK has also undergone enhanced lockdown. Several other countries, France, Italy, Spain, are also in the process of further restrictions. Many countries in Asia. I was just on the phone with our team in Sri Lanka, and there's been a renewed lockdown in Sri Lanka. China is enhancing its lockdown procedures because there's been further breakouts in China. One country is going in the opposite direction: the United States. As many of you know, Donald Trump several months ago appointed basically some quacks to run the COVID response. They began to subvert the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute of Health, and various other federal and state bodies that were mandated to engage the public in the kinds of procedures that were necessary to prevent the COVID-19 pandemic from spreading. The people that have surrounded Trump have convinced the president, and as of yesterday, the White House let it be known quasi-officially that they're not going to do anything at all. They've concluded that the best way to deal with COVID-19 in the United States is to engage in what they call herd immunity. Just let the pandemic run wild and hope that enough people get the disease, and that not very many people die, and then that's basically is going to take care of it. It's going to go away on its own. The preliminary estimates that have been on the news is that this could cause upwards of 2 million more deaths. Already the United States is only 4% of the human population. They have over 20% of all the COVID cases and COVID deaths. And the reason is that the Trump administration has been engaging in what can only be called mind-boggling negation of science and public health, to refuse to engage in the most simple hygienic procedures. And as a result, COVID-19 cases are going up in, I think now over 20 states are setting records. And the leading state, which exemplifies the problem, is North Dakota, with a governor, Republican governor, who has refused to engage in any public health procedures to negate the pandemic. So we're going into a very delicate period, everyone. Our governments are bifurcating, and it is unclear as we gather here today how this whole thing is going to pan out and how many more people are going to die, and what it's going to take to wake the world up, not only to the pandemic, but to how we fashion the future in such a way that pandemics don't happen. So the program that we have dedicated this week to, how we bounce beyond to regenerative economies, could not be more crucial. It may be the most important conversation in the world right now, because the human race is being called to attention. Some are paying attention, and others, regretfully, my country, is not. And as a result, the pandemic continues. So we are very, very fortunate to have humanity rising. We're graced by all the people from all over the world that are watching us every day. We thank all of our partners, not only the partnering organization, but the 40 plus live streaming partners that broadcast this out to 15, 20,000 people today, as we are doing every other day, and the people that join on Zoom. This is a critical time in human history. We have to pay attention, I would say, with ruthless realism to ensure that we do not further damage ourselves within the context, as we know from our scientists, in which we are running out of time. So I want to thank this panel that's gathered here this week. It's been unique since we started. It's a large group of people, a much larger group than we normally have. And it's a group of people that day by day are staying together to build on the conversation. It's been beautiful how Monday and then now Tuesday and now Wednesday have been building. So I'm delighted to turn it over to Raya Chandler, who actually has gotten up, I think it's about 3 o'clock in the morning in Auckland, New Zealand, to kick off our program. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Raya.
Thank you, Jim. And hello, everyone. Welcome back to those who have joined us for the last 2 days, and a fresh welcome to those of you who are participating for the first time. I'm honoured and grateful to be here, especially as a young woman amongst a phenomenal group of wise men and women who I have the utmost respect and admiration for. I'd like to acknowledge you, Jim, and Ubiquity University, for hosting such an exceptional series over the past 6 months. As you just said, it could be argued that the conversations held through Humanity Rising are the most important in the world at this time. My name is Raya Chandler, and I am currently based in Auckland, New Zealand, as Jim has just said. For the last year, I have participated in the Certificate of Regenerative Entrepreneurship offered by the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica. In the last 12 months through the course, I have discovered my ikigai, a Japanese concept meaning reason for being. I am committed to changing our global narrative from one of despair in the face of crises to one of hope and inspired action. By crafting a new story of optimism and regeneration, we are invited to imagine a world of new possibilities. The truth is, we all have the power to build an abundant, thriving, regenerative future, both individually and together. On Monday, we explored the theme of life at the center and how to bounce beyond our current paradigm into the next economies by connecting with nature through crises. We discussed how we could open the door from Horizon 1 into Horizon 3 by embracing Horizon 2 as the transition space, and the importance of the feminine energy and healing throughout this process. Yesterday, we continued bouncing beyond by diving into the theme of regeneration. We heard from Ugo, who helped us to understand biomimicry, dependencies, and the need of connection between relationships, which he expertly visualizes through the software 7 Vortex. Please refer to the chat where he has posted a link to the 7-day vortex map of this 5-day intensive. We also heard from Carolina, who spoke to us about feedback loops, homeostasis, and the necessity for deep listening and receptivity. Luis then presented on the role of regenerative education to bounce beyond, and how important it is for us to connect with nature by rewilding our education systems. Today, we sit with the theme of harmony. Please take a moment now to get comfortable and settle into what is going to be another incredible session. This is a space of radical collaboration, so please use the chat box and comment spaces across the different viewing platforms to voice your questions, thoughts, and ideas to all panelists and attendees. You can also use our hashtags on Twitter and other feeds to contribute and amplify the discussion with hashtag regen and hashtag bounce beyond. And now, without further ado, I'm excited to begin today and to pass over to Ugo to begin the program. Thanks, Ugo.
Carolina, you go first.
Hi, everyone. So what we planned for today and what we've been preparing is a topic on rhythm, a topic on flows, on cycles. And we thought, what can we do to talk about rhythm that take us right into it? So we prepared something that we would like to share. And so Ugo is going to be sharing the screen. I will be taking you through a journey of rhythms and hoping we can connect at that level. Let's remember that there are many rhythms. And by rhythm, I mean beats followed by accents in specific times. And that we have a couple of rhythms that are common across all cultures. So that's, to me, very amazing. It means at different times in different places all over the world, people heard the same rhythm and came up with the same melody. I think that's beautiful. And of course, right now we have evolved into so many different types of musics, etc. But we always hear the phrase that music is universal. It's a universal language. And the basis of music is rhythm. We are immersed in rhythms. So without further ado, here we go. Actually, I'm gonna share with you one particular rhythm that I chose. And this rhythm can be represented in different cultures. I'm gonna choose one that is represented in flamenco music. I'm gonna play a little piece, Hugo, before we start, so we can familiarize with its melody, and then we start the journey together. I hope Zoom plays on our side, but if you can hear the rhythm, there are beats, and there are accents. Pam, pa pam, pa pam, 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 pa pam, pa pam, pam, pam. It's almost like the earth's heartbeat. It's a very grounded earth beat to it. And again, I'm using flamenco. This rhythm is called jaleos. It's a specific palo of flamenco. Very good. Give me 1 second. And here we go. What do you mean rhythm? You ask. A parent hearing her baby's heartbeat for the first time. Poetry. Humans breathing. Tempo. Woman in moon cycles. Pulse. The stars emanating electromagnetic waves vibration. Tempo. In the songs of whales and birds and toads and crickets, sunset, sunrise, birth, death, expansion, contraction. Heart rate, breathing rate. We are but nested rhythms interrelating. We are immersed in endless melodies. Which one will you choose to bring your own music to? You want to scale impact, then feel the rhythm of what's already there. Attune to its beat. Add your own music. Till there's so much momentum, noise becomes music. Earth's seasons, trees breathing, Mother Earth breathes. Well, that was that. I hope Zoom was on our side. Thank you so much, Hugo. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's all we have to share for today. And we hope you felt the heartbeats of the earth. Nice. Good. Perhaps, Melly, do you want to go over our feedback from yesterday and start a conversation there?
Yes, thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Hugo, on bringing us the harmony that the creativity brings to us, and the embrace our full capabilities in order to be really connecting with life in ourselves and with others. This is really powerful to achieve harmony in ourselves, and especially in ourselves. And I think that one of the most important things from yesterday is that we achieved the point to understand deeply that this is not bouncing beyond and regenerate. It's not just only something outside ourselves, but it is inside ourselves. And that's the most key point on how we can vibrate from the rhythm of our hearts, deeply connected with the rhythm of Earth, of Mother Earth, to bounce beyond, to go beyond, 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 further into what we really imagine the world can be, and to hold hands together into this interdependence and into our connection and relationships. And everything starts from what we can acknowledge in our own processes, to bring love and to bring this sensation of going into something bigger than us, which is the communality. And the bridge of that is the feminine intelligence. So thank you, everybody who is participating in the comments and in the documents. And we really want to bring forward all those feedbacks, and we are already incorporating into what we are preparing, and what we are hearing from where you are all, and how we can together bridge all these gaps that we are feeling together in order to achieve really beyond this moment. So this is a very hard and profound paradigm shift. And I think that one of the tools that we have in order to do that is the butterfly example that Ian was showing us at the first day, which is the metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is a process that nature has invented to transform from one shape to another shape, from one behavior to another behavior, from one niche and one way of connect with the environment into another way of connecting to environment. And this transition has this amazing particularity, which is liquidifying the bodies, the shapes. And that's kind of scary a little bit if we think that we can use this metaphor to talk about how we can just drop a shape that we had been behaving and adopt another one. But this fear has a very amazing power as well, because it makes us to be interdependent and help us to, okay, I'm fear of something. Please, can I share this with you? And can you encourage me? And can you connect with me? Because I am passing through this liquidification process, and I am kind of wanting to be another kind of human, but I don't know exactly how to do it. So let's go together and do it together. So this is powerful. This is really powerful. And just we need to put us in more lightful mode. You know, let's play together into this metamorphosis. This is the invitation. So I really want to invite Ian and Stuart, I don't know who wants to start with this, to help us to understand how to imagine this future in this liquidification. And actually, I want to point out something. This liquidification in butterflies happens with something that is called imaginary cells. This is biological. This is scientific. And these imaginary cells help the structure of the caterpillar to unshape and to be, all these, the cells will be liquid and move into water space to reshape into the butterfly. So imagination is the best tool we have, and we have all this. So please, Ian and Stuart, let's help us in how we imagine the future.
Wonderful, Melina. Just beautiful. The imaginal cells that guide us towards this extraordinary future that we're just sensing and dreaming into together. So Ian, why don't you start with Three Horizons and we'll riff from there.
When you mention imaginary cells, Melina, part of the idea with Three Horizons is that some folks from indigenous cultures, they navigate huge distances across oceans, and they navigate via imaginary islands that don't actually exist. But they still navigate through them with them, and they have deadly accuracy for where they are going. So there is that metaphor actually transposes to this kind of thinking as well. And I just love that metaphor. I just think it works really, really well. The other thing about the butterfly, the monarch, they're unbelievably beautiful. And when they go through that state of metamorphosis, the middle state looks like it has nothing to do with the state before and the state that comes after. And yet it's where this transformation takes place. It's very unstructured, but it happens. What I'd like to do, when I raised the notion of Three Horizons on Monday, I gave us a very, very quick look at it. What I'd like to do in this session to help actually address the questions you're asking, you're posing, is to show you a real example of Three Horizons work that was done a couple of years ago on transformations and the need for new knowledge to actually transform how we are on the planet. And in this little example I'm going to show you, it'll take me not long, 5 or 10 minutes to go through. You'll see some patterns that I want to pull out and to help answer the things you put before me. Then what I'd like to do is actually go a little bit deeper on Three Horizons, because I picked up on some of the messages in the chat that actually it was going very fast on Monday and it felt complex but really interesting. So maybe if I go for a little gentle but deeper dive into that, and then what I'm going to do, rather than just leave you hanging with that, is actually show you where you can get all the resources to do this in Creative Commons licensed. So rather than just have me showing you PowerPoint slides, you can go and find resources for yourselves to actually become adept at this way of thinking. So if that's okay, I'll go into that mode if that's all right, and we can start. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the right slide deck up here, which is this one. And I'll go like that. Excuse me, this is me talking myself through to make sure I'm pressing all the right buttons. And then share screen. And this one. Now I'm hoping what you can see, if you give me a thumbs up, you're seeing Transformation 2017, Three Horizons Reflection.
Not yet, Ian. It's not up yet.
Okay. Check it again, because it says it's doing it. Hang on. And again. How's that now?
There you go.
Yes.
Now we got it. Okay, that's good. All right, the first thing for me to explain, which I didn't cover on Monday because of time constraints, is where this thing called Three Horizons comes from. It has several different roots, but the originating person was a guy called Tony Hodgson, who around about 20 years ago started to work on this notion of Three Horizons. That was done with an organization called the International Futures Forum, of which Tony is a founder. And then we, after many years, in 2013, founded this thing called H3 Uni, which is a university for the third horizon. It's named after this way of working. And I've put the URL on there for H3 Uni, and the reason I've done that will become clear as we go through. Transformations 2017 was a conference in 2017. It was in Dundee in Scotland in September. It had 340 attendees, that's quite a lot of people. And they were transformations, researchers, academics, activists, and regulators. Now, the transformations series of conferences runs every other year. So last year in 2019 was in Chile, and next year is going to be online. It's a 3-day conference. And what we did was we facilitated the whole conference, all 340 people, to work with everybody participating in this process. So this is a very inclusive process, and there's reasons why we like it to be inclusive, to have a large number of people, because then you get as many different views as you can possibly get. We have also done this with 5 people and 10 people and 30 people and 50 people. This one with 340 was sort of at the upper end of people working simultaneously. The question that was asked is this: what transformations are needed in the way we produce and use knowledge in order to enable wider transformations to sustainability to occur? Now, sustainability, what it's saying is we needed to transform what sustainability was about, okay? So that's sort of a significant point for us, I feel. The process, we split the whole conference into groups of approximately 30 people, so 10 groups, and each were to produce their own 3 horizons map, answering that question of what needs to, transformations are needed in knowledge around sustainability. And the reason I'm bringing this in is because the output is very specifically to do with transforming education. And I'll show you some of the results of the work that we did. Each of the 10 groups are facilitated by volunteers who we trained. 2 to 3 hour sessions, all concurrent, on the Thursday afternoon, it turned out. And overnight processing to bring all of those 3 horizons maps into one. And then we presented the overall interactive map back to the conference, so everybody could see that their input is included. The whole process took 23¾ hours. We got it done just inside 24 hours. This is what it looked like. Here are people actually in a workshop, talking around the things that they think are really important about these different 3 horizons. They then, here are the 10 3 horizons maps. There's me standing there looking a bit perplexed or worried because the amount of work that we had to do. In the background, with his back to us, is Tony Hodgson, the originator of 3 Horizons. Several other people came alongside, by the way, to actually help 3 Horizons to develop, and that's Adrian McCurdy there. There are the 10 3 Horizons maps. This is a little stop motion thing of us actually doing the work. So if I do this, I don't know how well that's playing where you are, but this is the overnight process that we did, which took a bit longer than you're seeing right now, to actually bring all these things together into a coherent overall map. Almost done. And there's Stefan Verveyen, who actually did the photography work for us. This is us actually working on the maps. You can see it's a physical thing that we were doing. You're actually working with the clusters. So all these clusters, these ovals were brought in from the 10 maps. We had pizza. There you go. We had pizza. This is a guy called Bill Sharp. Some of you may know of his name. Bill Sharp wrote the actual book on 3 Horizons called The Patterning of Hope. I've worked with Bill for many years. He's a very remarkable and inspirational figure. And this is him explaining, this is, we were having, as we were doing the work of bringing all the 3 Horizons maps together into one, we got stuck on a point and Bill would actually help us and facilitate us to actually get to the next stage and so on. Here, there's Tony, who says, grow learning practices that integrate meaningful knowledge, just working on the actual maps themselves. This is what it looked like in the room as we were working. Again, there's me with the back to us all here, and Tony and Adrian. The overall results, this is what we got. We got around 700 post-its as inputs, 700 we had to process. That generated around 61 of those ovals, and the 61 ovals gave us 14 clusters. So it's a layered model, if you will. Horizon 2 was 84 ovals, 11 clusters, and Horizon 3 was 66 ovals in 13 clusters. Now let's show you what it actually looked like. This is what we produced. This is the, by the way, this is the actual map we produced. And we did this, as I say, in real time. So this is the one, you can imagine I'm standing at the front, pointing at this on the screen and saying, this is the work that you have just done. But if we look at this here, so if we look at just this one here, say, this is Horizon 1, lack of systems thinking resulting in limited and partial views. That was what the conference felt. If I click on it, you see this. These are the 4 post-its that came through to actually say this was an issue that people were thinking about. And there were gasps in the audience because what people saw was that their input, every single input had been maintained and included in this overall view. So it becomes a very, very rich picture. If I click here on the bottom right, I go back to where we were. If I look at, let me just see. Dominated by power inequalities resulting in the exclusion of important voices. So again, somebody said there's power inequalities. Who decides what knowledge is and what the question is? not including stakeholders in identification and analyzing the research question, lack of cognitive justice, chasm between the rich and poor, politics, gender inequalities, bias in who is listened to, lots of marginalized voices, and so on. Okay, so this is actually quite a rich picture. That's what we were seeing in Horizon 1. In Horizon 3, there's a few things I can pick up on here. This one, you may not be able to see my cursor, but I'll click on it anyway. This is to do with embracing sources of knowledge beyond the rational and cognitive. We need to get past the usual Horizon 1 knowledge production education systems. We need to expand our epistemologies, embrace wildness, deep knowledge connect, e.g. indigenous and Western science, connect them together, theory and practice in a culture of experimentation, open to different varieties of knowing. That theme of knowing in a different way has come out several times in our work this week. And transdisciplinarity, including the humanities. Tacit and embedded knowledge, e.g. intuition, are enabled. We need to do that. We value emotions as much as logic. Integrate cognitive and emotional processes. This is the kind of input that was coming through from the conference. This one was really interesting. Knowledge is a global commons. We need, in our third horizon, what this entire group would like to see was a knowledge commons, which is available for all. No private ownership, culture of service and humility. Humility, again, just humility on its own, just humility about knowledge. Knowledge is a global commons, open access, accountability, limit corporate ownership and commercial use, responsibility to integrate, okay? So the things that were coming through were actually rather similar to some of the themes that have come through in our work right now in this week. If we look here, then we'll go to Horizon 2. So this is the butterfly, the metamorphosis stage, where actually these things are coming together, and what we're looking for are ways of actually surfacing the shift, the metamorphosis out of this left-hand side Horizon 1 result, which is all to do with fear, capitalistic society and values, lack of systems thinking, dominated by power inequalities, etc., 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 and towards the third horizon. If we look here, grow whole learning practices, this one. Education system based on pragmatic, critical, and reflective thought. Education initiatives that help reconnect with nature and relatedness. Shift all existing schools towards Steiner-style education, value multiple learning, etc. Universal free education, vision, universal free education. Vision-focused, transdisciplinary, intersectional, lifelong learning. Education across levels, cross and sectorial, sectoral education. Initiatives that foster mind and body connection. Teach mindfulness. Educational and learning practices that empower and challenge assumptions for lifelong learning. And reorient tertiary education towards this third horizon. Make it intercultural, make it experiential, and root it in places. And connection of science and art. Expression, integrate cognition and emotional. So if we look at this, so this is sort of what came out of the conference, and I could go much deeper, but all 700 post-it notes are in this presentation. And we did this, we did this overnight and presented it back to the group. So I just wanted to show you that. But what I also want to tell you is a bit of an announcement. 340 people contributed to this. And then an academic paper describing not just this process, but also the results and the recommendations coming out of this group have now actually been published. And it has 182, if I recall correctly, authors. So now what we have is a paper saying, which I know is an academic paper, and we may say, yeah, but what about action? Talk about that in a moment or two. But actually, to actually see this group deliver this, and for it to actually create a third horizon paper. So what I'm going to do now is stop that share. And I'm going to go to another share. I'm going to share this screen, which is that one. Go. Please. Now it's gone. I'm hoping you can see that. There's no possible way you could read this, but this is the paper, the academic paper. And if you see, here are the authors, everybody's name on it. Here is the paper which goes through the materials and the approach and what knowledge systems are actually about and how they need to transform. Here's the Three Horizons map and how it was actually done. Here's how the data collection analysis, what went on to actually produce that. Here are some of the pictures you've actually seen. I showed you in the presentation earlier, participants and so on and so forth. And it also comes to conclusions as well. Here are the kinds of conclusions. I'll read this out at the top for you. These are the challenges that inhibit knowledge systems to support navigation of transformation. Here on the left-hand side is the challenge. What does it mean? Here is the emergent property. There's a whole stack of stuff. This is actually pulling on that map that I showed you. Whoops, going too fast. Table 2, characteristics and emergent properties of envisioned knowledge systems. I can get table 3, contrast between the emergent properties of old and future. So this is doing a deep dive on exactly how we go about this transformation. I'll stop that screen right now so that I can see. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to show you. That's what it looks like when you do this kind of work. And this paper is specifically about transforming education to be regenerative, to be multicultural, to take in other forms of knowing other than the usual first horizon forms of knowing, and to be a knowledge commons where we all have access to it with fully supported education. There's a question in the chat box, which is this paper available? Unfortunately, the answer is not quite yet. It was published 2 weeks ago, but they published a late draft version rather than the final version. I spoke to the publishers this morning before coming on, and they are promising me that by Friday, I'll be able to give you the URL for the paper. Okay? I've been putting pressure on them. Look, I'm doing this today. I want this paper. Okay, so we'll be able to share that with you and you can see how it's done. Okay, so I wanted to show you that's real work, and it's flowed out of this amazing group that gathered. And the idea of facilitating almost 350 people in real time. My role in that, by the way, was to oversee the whole process, which when the 10 workshops were going on was me dashing from workshop to workshop saying, how's it going, do this, do that, all that kind of stuff. And it was a pretty intense 23 3/4 hours, but we got it done. So I wanted to show you that because I hope that relates to the kind of work we're talking about. And what's coming out of that is what is required in the Horizon 2 for knowledge transformation, which I hope is pertinent to us right now. Now what I'd like to do is look at something else, which is to dive a little bit deeper into 3 Horizons itself and to give you some resources. Thank you. And I'm just preparing the other deck. I'm going to start where we left off on Monday. And let me just get this up and running. And then I'll go share screen over here. Share screen. And then we'll share that one. Now, we came out of Bounce Beyond session with me saying, okay, let's link what Bounce Beyond is doing in terms of next economies with what we're talking about this week and the distinctive qualities that we need. And in fact, I've got the wrong slide up, which is my error, forgive me. Here we are. There's Bounce Beyond coming in, bouncing in. Oh yes, one thing to point out for you is that we now have a website called bouncebeyond.global. And if you go to that website right now, it's up and active, and you should be able to register if you're interested in knowing more about what Bounce Beyond is all about and so on. It's just bouncebeyond.global. Right, these are the things that we said we need to shift for education in the feminine. And I'd just like to echo what came out of the work that we did in Dundee. Collaboration and co-creation, that's what we were doing. Deep listening with empathy. When I talked you through the 3 voices, that's what it can help with that. Improving our systems for all, not just gaming them for the few. A natural systems approach, biomimicry. When Carolina was talking yesterday about things like homeostasis, that resonates very deeply with me, and I want to come back to that in a few moments. Working with complexity, because complexity is what generates uncertainty, and we have more and more complexity. We need healing. And different ways of knowing and indigenous wisdom, yep, that came shining through from Dundee. And building future consciousness and this notion of metamorphosis. You may remember that I took us through Horizon 1, degrading over time, Horizon 3, rising but not quite there yet, and Horizon 2 being the transformative journey between those Horizons 1 and 3. And that Horizon 2 can get grabbed by Horizon 1 and used for Horizon 1 to extend its life. What we're really looking for is Horizon 2 plus initiatives which head towards Horizon 3. We use the image of the twin strands of DNA to say what happens in the middle is actually, and go back to that metamorphosis idea of the monarch butterfly, we've got a strand of DNA from the world we want to move away from and the strand of DNA for where we're trying to get to. Okay, so that metaphor still holds true there. I want to take us further now. when you're doing this kind of work, and there's no need for you to take notes for any of this, because I'm going to show you how you can get all these assets for yourself, to what I'm showing on screen. The first thing we ask is, what do we need to sustain from Horizon 1 for sustaining innovation to address aspects? What do we need to do to change that gradually, but get on with it right now? Question 2, Horizon 1, what do we decommission? What do we say has to be taken out of Horizon 1 that is actually no longer fit for purpose, and be very clear about it? And there's also some aspects, the question 3, bottom right here, is what aspects of Horizon 1 should we retain? So those are our first 3 questions that we ask when we're doing the 3 Horizons work. And these were the questions that were put to that conference in Dundee. The 4th question is about Horizon 3. What does this envisioned system look like? We're trying to envision a future. So if we try to, what does the future feel like? What's going on? And like I say, you put yourself into a time machine and you go into this 3rd horizon and say, well, if I look around me now, what's happening in education is this, and that's taking place, and knowledge is being shared like that, and education is based on natural systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the kind of work that we would do. And then we look bottom left here, hope and encouragement from pockets of the future in the present. What we're actually saying is, you know what, Horizon 3 is here right now. Some of it is very small and tiny. It's a bit fragile. It may be under threat. It's under-resourced, but it is actually there. I'm working with a group in Nordic countries, which is Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And they're working on health systems. And they're holding a 5-day event saying, where are the pockets of the future in the present for our health systems? So this is an important question, where the hope come from. And then we look for the question 6, the transformative innovation. What in Horizon 2 will address aspects of the existing system that will pull us out of Horizon 1 and towards Horizon 3? I talked about the 3 voices. You remember those. Those are negative mindsets. And again, I'm going to point you at all these resources, okay, and the notes that go with them as well. So we talked about the negative mindsets, and actually want to get to the positive mindsets. And the way we actually go around doing this kind of work is we actually have conversations, real life human conversations. I will advocate Horizon 1. And if I'm going to advocate Horizon 1 negative, we give you a card that looks like this. So you have to hold this role, and you have to enact this role with authenticity. Even if you disagree with it completely, you have to advocate this. You see H2 as they risk displacing our current position. They're too disruptive. They divert essential resources that we need to maintain Horizon 1, and they create potential or actual competition. Horizon 2 is dangerous. You have to advocate that. And by advocating it, we develop empathy, and we start to say, well, hang on a second, if I was in their shoes and I was trying to do this, maybe I'd start to feel a little bit like this as well. And you see visionaries of Horizon 3 as well, they just make no sense. They're just so far away from where we're at. There's no way we can see how to get there. They're irrelevant dreamers, and they're dangerous and should be stopped, okay? And if we go to the next stage, we then say, okay, let's switch this and put the positive mindset on. So if you can read those through yourself, I don't think you need me to read them out. But what this is about actually role playing so that you get empathy with the various positions, and then you can figure out what dialogue would look like to be generative, to start working towards actually the transformations we're trying to achieve. Oh, you've got that. Let's just move on. This is what Horizon 1 looks like. Okay, so again, Horizon 1. The approach is how we get things done today. We're locked in. We get things done today. That's what Horizon 1 does. And we have incremental innovation. We're always changing. We're always moving forward. We do it incrementally. And we are framed by what we know how to do. We have familiar approaches and dominant actors. We know how to do, and we have people who know how to do it. And we have time as a limited resource. That's our situation for Horizon 1. If we look at Horizon 3, the approach is transformative shifts from the present. We question assumptions. We want new actors. We have emerging patterns of value with lots of different alternatives. And we have a sense of time as a defining moment rather than as a constraint. If we look quickly at Horizon 2, here's a transition zone. Horizon 2 looks both ways. It's like that. It looks both ways. When I introduced this approach to the head of strategy at the biggest business school in the UK, which is Manchester, I had Tony with me, Tony Hodgson, and we drew the 3 horizons. And I said, draw a V above, just draw a V, a right angled V like this above the transition zone of Horizon 2. And I said, right, now can you tell Peter, who was the head of strategy, about dilemma resolution. And a dilemma there's a sort of formal definition of a dilemma, which is where you have two things that you need to do. You think you've only got resources to do one, and you can't figure out which one you should do. But you realize if you only do one, not doing the other one will damage you badly. But if you do the other one, not doing the first one will damage you badly. And how do you actually manage to work through that dilemma? So, and Three Horizons is a dilemma resolve to actually manage staying in the present and surviving whilst you're actually building the future. And we asked the head of strategy, who in this entire business school knows about this kind of thinking? And the answer was nobody. And that's when the University of Third Horizon was born. Just a little story for that. So that's the entrepreneurial view of Horizon 2. It's innovation and it's turbulence. We expect innovation. We expect entrepreneur kind of behaviors, and we champion those. And sense of time is an opportunity cost. We need trade-offs. We have to compromise and move forward. I'm going to finish on a couple of slides, which is some archetypes, as we call them. I've got Zoom hiding my screen, so I need to just move that out the way. There you go. This is variant 1, which is the one we'd like to have. This is sort of, when it all works perfectly, it looks like this. Okay. Here is business as usual. Transformative innovation comes along, and meanwhile, the viable future for Three Horizons emerges, and it's all smooth and lovely. It's rarely like that. Let me show you a couple of variants of what can actually happen. And there are many more, but this is just to sort of load things in. I'll go here, there. Whoops, let me go back up. There we go. This is variant 2. Horizon 1, the red line collapses. It just suddenly, it's going really, really well, and it just collapses in a very sudden time. It goes very non-linear change. Meanwhile, Horizon 2 isn't quite ready, and neither is Horizon 3. So it takes a long time to get the slow recovery, which is what happens if you don't do your Horizon 2 and 3 work, and Horizon 1 is on the verge of collapse. I look at Horizon 1 right now, and I wonder about this pattern. This is the variant 3, which is capture and extension. This is where Horizon 1 captures the innovations that the blue line of Horizon 2 is generating and extends its life over a longer and longer and longer and longer and longer. And it takes a long time for the third horizon to actually rise. Here's variant 4, which is where Horizon 2 overshoots. As you can see, Horizon 2 gets ramped up really high, but actually it collapses because it can't sustain itself. But eventually Horizon 3 emerges. I'm just going to go back to that image again. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us, which is butterfly and Horizon 2. I'm going to stop the slideshow at that point, and come back to where I can see everybody. Okay. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. I normally set a stopwatch and I don't know. So can somebody please advise me? How am I doing on time?
Yes, Ian, we can take another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, right, because I've also realized I didn't show you what I should have shown you as well. And this is where I'm going to show you where you can get these resources for yourself. So if I go here, excuse me, and go share screen. I will share. Right, I'm hoping you can see that. Is that okay? This is the H3 Uni website. You can also go to the IFF website, the International Futures Forum. But what I want to point you towards is this thing called the resource library here. I hope you can see that, the resource library here. So if you go to h3uni.org, H3, Horizon 3 University, h3uni.org. If you go there and click on the resource library, what you should see is welcome to the resource library, as you'd imagine. Where do you start? Here are some of the core methods. So this is dilemma navigation, which I was talking to you about before. I first came across dilemma resolution when I was working at board level in a large organization, heading up strategy and development of the management team. And the chief exec and the finance director were at each other's throats, more or less literally, on a situation where they wanted to get to market fast, but they needed to test products properly, and they were just locked in this dilemma. And I spoke to Tony Hodgson, and he said, I think you've got a dilemma there, Ian. And I said, do I? Because I hadn't heard of that properly before. But what happened was 2 days later, Tony facilitated a dilemma resolution session with these two teams that had been at war for 2 years. And within an afternoon, they were supporting each other and they'd moved forward and it was unblocked. And when I look at dilemma resolution, I see an awful lot of techniques that are actually dilemma resolution with a shell around them. And Three Horizons is dilemma resolution. And the dilemma that we all face as human beings is, how do we build the future whilst we maintain ourselves in the present? We have to do both. Okay, so I recommend dilemma resolution. But let's look at Three Horizons so you can see what we've got. I hope you can read this. Here you can go to a tutorial, you can go through a facilitation guide. Let's go to tutorial so you can see this. This is the text that describes it. Oh, look, there's some Three Horizons patterns. Oh, you might recognize that picture there because, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see this a bit more easily. Hang on a second. There, okay. So this is where the images that I used in my slide deck came from. This is all Creative Commons. It explains to you how the third horizon works. There's the second horizon. It explains the variants that you get. There's the variants that I've just shown you. Okay, they were taken straight from here. Okay, there's the mindsets and how you can be in the future. Now, if we go down here, it tells you about methods. This is how you can go about doing this for yourself with your teams. If you go to the IFF website, you will get toolkits that actually for children to learn this type of thinking. And as you can see, it's under Creative Commons. I'm just going to leave it at that, just to let you know that that resource is there for us, okay? It's there, you can download it and just use it. I wanted to just reflect very briefly, I'm going to stop the share and come back online. When Carolina was talking about homeostasis, which is the ability of an entity, normally an organic entity, to maintain internal balance. What also occurs to me is the notion of, well, if you zoom out from that single entity and the system in which it is embedded, sometimes you want the whole system to be homeostatic to actually maintain its balance. And you have a situation where we may have an entity which might be an organization relating to its environment, and the notion of structural coupling comes in, where you have to stay coupled as you co-evolve with your environment, which is what Horizon 2 has to do. You have to, if you don't stay coupled to your environment, the environment rejects you and you haven't succeeded in what you're trying to do. The reason it's called structural coupling is because in this kind of thinking, structure drives behavior. And if your environment, if you manage to help shift your environment, the environment, you've helped it shift its structure so it shifts its behavior, then you've got to catch up and you may have to change your structure. And that notion of coevolution of structure, I think, is really important behaviorally. There's a few other things about organic systems. I'll just close with a thought that when I hear strategy, divisions, companies, resources, all those things, I think of military terms because that's where most of them come from. So I wonder, is it an organization I'm looking at or is it a militarization? If I hear organizations talking about efficiency, productivity, quality, those type of things, cost cutting and so on, they are machine terms. So the mechanizations are still not organizations. An organization should be organic and should operate as an organism as far as I am concerned. And if we look deeply into biomimicry and look at what nature has done for us to enable us to be viable and shift and change over time, do you know what? If you look, you find, and the patterns are there of how that actually works. I think I've probably talked far too much. I think I'll hand over to Stuart now. There you go.
Beautiful, Ian. So imagine a journey. Imagine that you are a single cell, fertilized cell of a monarch butterfly encased in an egg sac, growing, emerging, creating form, and becoming something a little bit like a caterpillar, technically a larva. But that's not the end of your transformation. It's just the beginning. And then you find a way to encase yourself in this beautiful chrysalis, this magnificent container for further transformation. And as Melina told us so beautifully, imagine literally liquefying everything that you thought you knew. You're in Horizon 1 and you realize none of this may sustain me on the journey. It's been what I needed to be here. But to get to Horizon 3, this thing I can only faintly imagine, I literally have to liquefy my structure in a coherent Horizon 2 way so that I'm always alive, functioning. I have a metabolism, even as I'm completely liquefying myself. And then I'm close to being a butterfly. And suddenly I'm there and I'm cracking open that chrysalis, breaking out of it. And I'm a butterfly. But the incredible thing about a monarch butterfly is no one individual can make the journey by itself. It takes at least 3 generations of monarch butterflies to go from their home in central Mexico all the way to parts of America and return. No one butterfly can make that journey. And that initial cell was just the beginning of transformation after transformation, and a journey none of us can do in 1 generation. We need probably 7 generations at least to regenerate humanity and regenerate our role in this planet. So 3 horizons, they're all present at each moment. That's something very important to think about. They're not sort of abstract timelines. They're 3 ways of being that we carry within us simultaneously. That first horizon of legacy, history, existing structure and form, that third horizon of incredible aspiration and hope and possibility, and a second horizon that is this sensing and ability to see the tiniest coming into being of possibility. And there was a beautiful question wondering how 3 horizons relates to Otto Scharmer's work on presencing. And really, there's this amazing way cutting across many different sciences, cutting across mystical traditions. It's a way of being human, and it's something that all organisms have, is that sensing into the minutest possibility of what might be emerging. So whether that's David Bohm, a brilliant quantum scientist, who after decades of wrestling with what the quantum could mean, what this duality of wave and particle could possibly mean, and paradoxes about faster than light communication, he felt that there was this implicate order that already exists that you can unfold into an explicate order. And he developed a process called dialogue that involved just very deep sitting with each other. I've done this, it's very powerful, until you almost have a shared quantum field of communication and openness and creativity. Very similar to Scharmer's theory U, for those of you that are familiar with it. Just the top of the U on the left is our usual way of just kind of downloading and just pushing something out, and then gradually sinking on that left side of the U deeper into just experiencing and being, not needing to project a form or a framework or a view, sink to the bottom of you, perfect, just presencing, that Bohmian dialogue, the implicate gradually being sensed and becoming explicate, and then emerging up the right side of the U with that sense of prototypes, energy, possibility, trying things out, and then just cycle after cycle of that. And then all of this ultimately connecting back to 3 horizons as a way of being, just that you can use constantly to have deep, deep empathy for those that are in horizon 1 because they have a family to support, or a nation that's falling apart that they're desperately trying to govern with what's at hand, and just having this incredible empathy and compassion on this journey, knowing we can't do this journey alone. It'll be many generations of humans, and we need our more than human allies, many generations of all the other beings on this planet. But that if we're open to that journey and that presencing and all 3 horizons simultaneously, that gives us a place of empathy and compassion, that we're all just trying to make sense of our journeys. And if we can support and nourish and nurture and remind us, when we're feeling disconnected, or remind us when we can no longer connect to the second horizon or the third horizon, or connect out to other living communities, that possibility, that connectivity is there, and that we're part of this extraordinary shared story, this 14 billion year story of transformation, differentiation, autopoiesis, creativity that the universe has created for itself. And the last third of it has been life on this planet, the last third of the universe's journey. So really, we're only the third generation. The first 5 billion years brought us galaxies, second 5 billion years, more preparation, the third 5 billion years. We're just the third cycle, and that's life on Earth. So Ian, I think we should probably send it over to Edward and Karen. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yep, can I just have a couple of two small closing thoughts? One was that Tony Hodgson spent time with David Bohm, and the notion of the implicate order in Horizon 2 becoming explicit in Horizon 3 is not lost on Tony, or indeed this approach. And the second thing is, Stuart, you just mentioned a word that I can't just let go by, which is autopoiesis, which is a very devil of a thing to spell, but biologically, I think it's really important. At some point in this week, I think we should open out the notion of autopoiesis, because I think it's critically important. That's it.
Wonderful. I'll bring it forward to tomorrow. We'll talk about autopoiesis. Thank you, Ian. Masterful, beautiful presentation. And now Edward and Karen trying to make sense of Three Horizons in a different way.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you so much, Stuart. Edward and I are going to share this conversation, but I'm going to kick it off with a different approach, as Stuart said, a different approach to the Three Horizons. And it's building on what we've been talking about over the last 3 days, our connections. It's been mentioned today to rhythms and cycles, our connections to Mother Earth, but coming at it from the human perspective, because we can talk about if we all don't live inside a forest or connected to nature, and sometimes we find it difficult to navigate our way into these conversations when we are still in a human form. And we are talking about education and what's the regenerative education we need to bring to our children, our young people, and into the world for our future. And so I'd like to kick us off. My background is I actually started an alternative healthcare company in aromatherapy, actually, in the 80s. I had no business background. I hadn't even finished high school. And my business was built on community and Steiner's principles of anthroposophy. So it was very much formulated out of my heart. I built it with my family, and we became a family in the business. And it was all based on well-being. Fast forward to now, I have a consulting business called the Flourish Initiative, and my mandate is really to bring about human flourishing and planetary flourishing. So I want to share some of those principles, but Edward and I share a very important connection, and that is the education of our children, the education of our young people. We're both parents, and we're going to include that in this conversation. Because when my experience was when I fell pregnant, everything in my life changed. And when I ask most people what precipitates change in their life, there's a theory that it's usually crisis, pressure, or threat that can produce change. Or what produces transformation is imagination, inspiration, and desire. So the minute I found out I was pregnant, my diet changed, my exercise program changed, everything changed, because I knew I was growing life inside my body. So for me, that was my revelation at the age of 26, that was my epiphany, that the feminine and being maternal is something very, very special. And we've all come from our mothers. Everyone listening today, everyone on this call has a navel. We were connected to our mothers through the umbilical cord. We shared blood, heartbeat, and nourishment through the mother. And I want to make that connection to Mother Earth, because sometimes we forget how, and we've been talking a lot about it, this profound connection to our Mother Earth, but also to bring it back to our human and more than human aspects. So I want to introduce, if I can share my screen. So I want to remind us today that the theme of the day is harmony. And I'm just going to click up to full screen. So the definition in the dictionary of harmony is the quality of forming a pleasing and consistent whole. So one of the things that I've noticed, I have an organization called FemQ, and the reason the organization was started was because the feminine, if we were to have wholeness and integrity restored to the human psyche and to our planet, we have to reinstate and respect the dignity and the qualities of the feminine. So I want to touch on that, and Edward and I will touch on that together. But I want to also bring in these images of nature. In nature, we have reciprocity. That's how we can learn, not just through our human exchanges, but from the natural world. We see that reciprocity, how there's no demand upon one or the other. They exist and coexist to support the full functioning of life. This one I adore because I think it's one of the qualities, devotion, that used to be or has for centuries been connected for many people to the church. But the devotion in the virtues of the human spirit is actually based on reverence. And if we look at this image, just spending time on this image for just a moment, when we look into each other's eyes, as we can on the Zoom call, as we do into our children's eyes, as we do into our partner's eyes, we fall in love. And how do we bring our devotion to Mother Earth? How do we fall in love with each other? How do we fall in love with Mother Earth? So devotion, I think, is a particular quality that I certainly discovered in motherhood. We will all find it in different ways and expressions, but that was certainly mine. And I think it is a very powerful and important quality that we see in the animal kingdom. When a mother bear protects her children, it's the fierce devotion and protective nature of the mother. And it's the devotion of, how are you? The empathy we've spoken about for this past week, the compassion we need. And we bring that with as the basis of reverence for the other, for life. Perseverance. We all know the story of the penguins and how amazing the penguins are, how they persevere. But perseverance, if we think about the virtue of this word versus the definition in the dictionary, perseverance is what we all need to bring now with a new way of operating, not the stoic endurance that our forefathers needed, but a different sort of perseverance. Perseverance because we will continue, because we want to bring life to life. We want to look after the generations to come. And with the penguins, of course, it's the males that sit on the egg to hatch the egg. So often in nature, we see the reversals of what we traditionally have held as masculine and feminine roles. So this is another quality. How do we look into nature and see how she represents in the other than human species on the planet? How do we look into and learn from the qualities that that our kindred spirits or other sentient beings bring? Connectivity. If we look at a spider's web and dwell on the image for a moment. In this week, we're all connecting through Zoom, but how do we sustain the connectivity? How do we make sense of the web that we build and bring it to life and hold each other so that it's strong, and that we build on this week, and that we build education from this notion of that we're all connected? Because at the moment, the traditional form, my daughter, some of you heard me mention my daughter went to a Steiner school and my background is anthroposophy. But one of the things that in the Steiner school they teach is that it's all nature-based. There's no right angles in the Waldorf schools when they're built from scratch, because there's no right angles in nature. The children are taught to connect to the earth, to poetry, to ritual, to song, and they actually don't learn to read or write and take intellectual concepts into their being until they're 7 years old, when the teeth have been formulated, which is the most hardened force in the body, and all of the organs of the body can receive information and knowledge, not just the brain. So this is connectivity where all of our organs and our operating system is actually digesting and processing information all the time. So how do we move out of our heads and get back connected to our intuition, our gut, our heart, open our hearts to each other and to what's needed for the future? These are some of the qualities we see in nature. Something came up in the last 2 days, and I think it was Carolina, you said, what are we listening to? And those that shout loudest, who are we listening to? And how can we transform our listening? How can we learn to listen from what the future is asking of us? And this really speaks to the third horizon, as I understand it, Ian, and how you presented it, is how can we listen for what's needed? When we listen to a child that's crying, when we listen to a need or a concern of another, and we respond with compassion, how can we learn to listen from the future and what Mother Earth is asking of us right now? And how can we respond? So I think one of the most important things for me is when we talk about rhythms and cycles and moving into the third horizon, is I think at a very personal level, which is part of what I teach from the human level, is how can we honor, I question and ask people, how can we honor the seasons if we don't honor the seasons of the soul? How do we honor the winter of hibernation and stillness and pausing in order to regenerate, to come into the spring, if we can't deal with loss, if we can't deal with death, and we can't move through these cycles as we're in right now of the crisis? And I think this is one of the most important things for children, is that they learn to move through their transitions of their life and really refer to them as seasons of the soul that we see reflected in nature. And often the question is, what do we need to let go of to move into the next horizon, into Horizon 3? What am I carrying from my past, my traumas that I need healing, my heartbreaks that I carry around as an old story, or my sense of worth or lack of it? What do we need to let go of to really move through these seasons and bring the best of ourselves? So I'm going to pause here because I would like Edward to jump in, because I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking and I want your contribution. But there's a few more slides, Edward, if I can continue for just a little bit. Is I call restoring integrity to the human system is needed. So consider for a moment that we are full and resourceful, and we have our agency, all of us on this call, and we've had our successes and our failures. But perhaps a new possibility of integrity is not that it's a moral imperative, but as an imperative for completeness and wholeness and no one left out. No being, no aspect of nature. So perhaps restoring harmony must also include restoring the feminine principle into its rightful place. So moving into flow, not just structure and intellect. Ian McGilchrist speaks and has written his book, The Master and His Emissary, and speaks of the left and the right hemispheres of the brain and how we've overvalued the left hemisphere, which is how our education systems have been built. We need to give rise and credence and dignity to the right hemisphere of imagination, relationships, and restore this aspect so that we have the full operating system. And remind ourselves of the miracle of life that is carried in the biology of a woman. So that doesn't make a woman more special. It's just that she's been negated, and the feminine has been negated in both men and women. But this miracle of life that comes through the biology of a woman is critical, the miracle of life that comes through Mother Nature. And the preciousness of life, that we reconnect to this in each other, and with ourselves. Finding our feet. When a child learns to walk, Rudolf Steiner said that's when the will comes in. This uprightness, this desire, this yearning to be upright, to move into the world. And we need balance to find our feet. We need balance. And balance is a dynamic state. It's not static. It's not one or the other to find equality. It's dynamic, and we have to keep working with the masculine, the feminine. When is it needed? When is it not? Have we developed? Do we understand it? This is finding our feet, bringing and restoring the feminine back into our education system, where we play, we use imagination, we care for one another, and we re-establish that connection. And of course, to unleash the full potential and the fullness of potential in life, the joy that we all have within us, that somehow through our conditioning, our structures, our systems, we have lost this joy. And how can we restore this? How do we come back to our essence, our source? I love this image so much of this little boy. It just makes me smile so much. And in the pause that we have right now, the pause that the virus has given us in some ways, it's what I call, in a different context, it's critical, it's a pandemic, it's disaster for many, it's taken back women's rights 70 years, and it's also an opportunity, as all crisis is. And I want to share this with you. I wrote a book in 2001 called Sacred Spaces when I went through one of the most difficult times in my life. And I asked myself, where are the sacred spaces? I couldn't find them. If I didn't go to church, I couldn't find them. So this meeting, this gathering is a sacred space for me. And a sacred space is actually a liminal space. And I really invite people to consider, because pregnancy for me was a liminal space as well. It was a time I had to be patient. We're giving birth to something, all of us on this call, all of us in this meeting, we're giving birth to something. We need patience. We need to pause and consider what we need to let go of, what's liquefying, as Carolina and Ian and Stuart have said. But if we read this out, I love this, this quote from Richard. A liminal space is where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our world left behind, while we are not sure of the new existence. That's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay as long as you can by whatever means is possible. This is a sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart and a bigger world is revealed. If we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idealizing normalcy. And there is nothing normal about how we've been living. It's destructive. It's being destroying us. So I want to pause there, because I know that Edward used a bridge image on our first day. So I come back to the bridge that we're crossing. And Edward, if you can please jump in and join me.
Thank you, Karen. I hope I can speak. My neighbor decided to change the roof today, and it's right across my window. Yeah, this session has moved away from the academic dimension, the one-way dialogue. I'm so embedded in it, I forget I'm on a Zoom call. I feel like I'm with you physically, and of course mentally in my heart. And looking back, I come from a scientific background, all the way to PhD. I used to spend several weeks a year behind an electron microscope in a dark room for hours and days, until I came to realize that a lot of what I was doing was for an ego trip and peer-reviewed journals and the academic travel up the scale, and losing sight of what was really important, and actually believing that I was doing important things by publishing in these peer-reviewed journals that only 4 or 5 people around the world would read and understand what I was publishing. And I was actually invited to give the opening plenary speech on the World Reproduction Congress in Australia. And I was sitting there writing the initial paper. I had a 2.5-hour plenary at the beginning of the Congress. And halfway through the paper, I got the phone. I resigned to my job. I got a friend and said, will you cover me on this Congress? I'm moving away. And within 3 hours, I had cut my life and started a new life. And that's where I decided to found the university to actually be able to educate in a different way. Of course, a year later, I was divorced. I had no job and I had no money. and the 2 cars were standing in the garage with an empty gas tank. But there I realized what we've been talking about. It's a personal transformation. It's an inner transformation that has to happen. And from there on, I just ran as quickly away as I could from my first horizon, keeping a few things and trying to move to that third horizon. And there's where I started actually trying to pull things together. And I go back to the cultural evolution component. If we look back at human behavior, we go back to the hunters and gatherers, and to the men having to be strong, having to go out and take risks, having to deal with dangerous animals and come back with food, while the women were there taking care of the kids, the family, and the elders. And that started the division, because then, yeah, the risky, the exciting part, the adventurous part is for the man, and the woman stays home and gathers fruit and takes care of the kids. And we believed that and kept on. And if you look at it, the military, now we have a few women in the military, but you don't see generals being women. If you look at conquest, if you look at colonialism, if you look at religion, Catholic religion, I mean, the men get paid as priests. The women, they don't get a salary. The nuns don't get a salary. And they don't have the same position, and they have to serve the priests in the Catholic system. If you look at, and Ian spoke about mechanization and the difference from organization, we have come to a very mechanistic way of thinking. And if we don't look at how this whole thing came upon, it will be very difficult. And I truly believe, and I think Jim said it the first day, if he had one action, he'd put women in power. And I think it's a deep thought. At the university, I was a terrible student throughout my whole educational life. I hated school. And when I got to 18 and I had my own decisions, I probably went to about 10% of the courses at the university. I just couldn't stand sitting there and listening to a guru talk and repeat what's in the textbook. And I used to hate the classes of ethics and gender because they were out there, you know. And now I think ethics, and I would take the word gender away. I prefer to think of it as a feminine principle, because it, of course, there's a correlation with gender, but it's deeper than that. We need to go into that deep transformation and actually think of that feminine principle as the main solution to our big challenges today. And it's not a question of all these fights about gay rights and women's rights. When you see women today, well, I would say 20 years ago, if they wanted to be successful, if they wanted to become president, if they wanted to have an important job, they'd imitate the men's behavior. We have Margaret Thatcher as a good example. She was a woman physically, but she was a man mentally. And we see lots of these, and they dress up in suits and they make the different, and they try to really live in that man's world. And the men are incapable of actually solving the issues with their heart, many of them, and looking at the real bonds. And I lived that process. When I had my first generation of children, yes, I spent a lot of time with them playing. And maybe I was a little bit different because I helped them do their homeworks and stuff like that. But I never really took the same responsibility as with my younger son, that's now 8, where we're really living the life together. And that is part of the reason why I moved from sustainability to regeneration, because that happened inside me. So how do we educate in the future? And how do we design this new education? it has to be with a whole different view on the feminine, understanding the caring, understanding that we are linked to this Mother Earth, that we cannot put a price on nature. We can value nature, but we cannot put a price on nature. We can value relationships, but we really have to do that internal process. And I see the future of education as the capacity to co-create in a very, very deep process between the people who are sitting there co-creating and living it from inside. And the educational process actually would like to shift away from the word education and go to the word learning, because it will be a learning process, not an educational process. There again, just think of that teacher standing up a meter above the students, all the students lined up, being measured with the same ruler. It just will not work. So how do we wake up this creativity? And kids don't have that division. I mean, you see little boys playing with dolls, and it's not until the parents tell them, you're not supposed to play with dolls, that they start moving away from that totally innocent, playful mode where kids are indifferent. They don't think about gender when they're small. It's a cultural thing. So we need to educate from that stage on about the power issues. And most of the famous universities, and I used to say the names of those, are still teaching on competition, on leadership. That leadership is, how do I get in front of everybody? How can I smash my classmates? Because if I get the best position in my class, I'm going to get the best job. We need to reverse that. And it's in the educational system. I took my boy out of the German school before they did too much damage to him, and put in a different school where at the end of the year, every kid gets a recognition. And it was so emotional to see this classmate of my son get a recognition for being the best yoga instructor, a 7-year-old kid. The other one for being a best soccer player. The other one for being the best actor. In that German school, I don't know, I didn't keep him long enough there, but my older kids went to that school. Only the best grades would get the recognition. And they had one exceptional recognition, which my son got several times, was just the best classmate at the whole school level, the best friend. But it was an exceptional one. And my older son, got it 3 times in the years he was there. So we need to recognize that we are all completely different, every single child. And if we want to have them keep their creativity and that innocence and that not discrimination of gender issues and other issues, competition, we need to reinvent education from the beginning. And I think that's a journey we have to be doing. And we're not at the beginning. Louise, Karen, Stuart, Raya with her initiative will be presenting on the last day. We're there, we're walking. We now have to run a little bit and use this pause, as Karen said, of this. And I know people get mad at me when I say it's a gift of nature. Coronavirus is a gift of nature because it's giving us a chance to wake up. And there could be a potential vaccine or treatment. And as I said the first day, extinction, there is no way back. So we really need to do this transition, and I'll stop there. This was totally improvised.
Exactly. Thanks, Edward. You just reminded me also, I wanted to share that, especially because you just mentioned COVID again. At the beginning of the lockdown, I had this question come into from somewhere, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was almost like it just impregnated my being, got embedded somewhere in my conscious. And the question was, who would I be if I wasn't me? I was like, wow, that's a big question. Who would I be if I wasn't me? I pulled out of all my corporate work and I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. So that meant I had no income. So I was willing to say, yep, time for really what I'm committed to. So, and as you know, we're working together. I'm working with Ian. I'm in part of Bounce Beyond. Now, I'm not suggesting that people make catastrophic changes when they've got young children and they've got resources they have to find to look after their children. But one of the things that, as you said, Edward, those questions that refused to go away when you looked at your life, and I was asked that question in myself, who would I be if I wasn't me, without my conditioning, without my adaptations, without my limiting beliefs and my constraints, who could I be? And that's why I think this liminal space, this time of pausing, is really a time we have to ask ourselves, who are we going to be? Who will we become? And how will we educate and bring our young people forward so that their fullest potential is recognised? And I remember going into the Steiner School all those years ago, and I was so upset the little boy was sitting out in a tree and all the other children were in class and the bell had been rung and the teacher was asking them to come in. And I was all huffety back in the 80s thinking, he's not very disciplined and I'm not sure about this school for my child. Rebecca was only 5 at the time. And I said to the teacher, I'm curious, why is, I can't remember his name now, but why is he sitting out in the tree and I could feel my arrogance when he should be in class. My old system. And she said, you'll have to excuse him, Karen. His mother's dying of cancer and he needs space. He needs place. And we let him find his way. That's what I'm hoping.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Edward.
Next speakers, please. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, I think we're going to hand over to Ian and Hugo, or anyone want to build on the conversation before we hand over for closure. Any one of our beautiful family members here.
I would actually love to hear from Luis and his perspective. If we can link to what he shared with us yesterday on regenerative education.
Thanks, Carolina. I'm thinking as I listen to Edward, precisely that we need to move down into the soul of the earth or into our essence in order to regrow from there, to sprout into a new being. And this is the process of liquefaction that Melina was mentioning. So currently, we have different scaffolds and containers that dictate how we live and what the rules are. And we also have beliefs that are entrenching us into thinking that we have no way to move out of that. So those two components limit us totally. But they're an illusion. They're an illusion that was constructed by 100 or more years of narratives that build a couple of definitions that are critical. So how do we define well-being? How do we define success? How we define wealth? All these little words are molding that scaffolding and are defining that, I cannot feel well if I'm not successful, but being successful means having power and money and accumulating, and you start building this imaginary world where we're living. So I think in this process, nature becomes really the one that reminds us, because if we allow ourselves for silence within nature, and if we allow ourselves for nature to start bringing its feminine power into our own bodies and our own self, the only result that's possible is the emerging force of regeneration. and the emerging capacity for becoming regenerative. As Karen and Edward said, as we're small, we start, we have the world ahead. Colors don't matter. Differences don't matter. Smiles matter. Support matters. Being with someone, laughing with someone matters. And being able just to be and be in well-being matters. So that's where we have to go back to. And in order to do that, we need to do two things. One, as adults, start looking intentionally and with volition for the spaces that allow for those layers of scaffolding to crumble down and deconstruct. And in education, we need to allow for the construction, or not the construction, for the emergence of those relationships with value, with the value they really have. And this is what allows for regenerative capacities. So if we look at what we did yesterday, a child is born, he must be allowed to explore, discover, and feel nature and start to connect it deeply with life. As they grow older, they start sensing and learning how to use their senses. And here we're talking hands, eyes, smell, ears, but also intuition and heart. And this is where the invisible starts becoming evident. So as we grow, and if we look at education, we're growing from a deep sense of connection into an increased capacity to sense the world, sense the connections, and sense our interbeing. And then only then we go into knowledge and action. Because in order to act regeneratively, we need to be interconnected and feel our interbeing. And this is an essential part. So in education, this flow of allowing people to emerge regeneratively and to become their regenerative selves will ultimately make us, shift, and will make us shift into a community that is caring, a community that is building life and creating the conditions conducive to life, like Carolina mentioned the other day. So I think education has this flow, and this is the shift we need to do. Currently, education starts even with some countries at 1 year old, having kids forced to learn to read, learn math, and learn structure. So they're basically building the scaffolding before they even got to explore and discover. They're losing their capacity to explore and discover. And awe is associated to discovery and exploration. And if you look at awe and the science of awe, it's incredible. Human spirit is consolidated as we fall in awe. And nature is the most awe-inspiring of all powers in our earth. So this is what I'm thinking right now.
Thank you, Luis. I would like to acknowledge you and Karen's connection, and Edward's as well. I was just imagining how we all listening to these words can, like, a whole space of safety to create like a buffer between our intentions and our attentions and our energy, to create this safe space of the transition of the human spirit into something new for ourselves, which is the most critical part of the century, and for others, for our children, and for all the spaces that needs education. And I want to link it with the beginning of this session about having this pause that also Karen mentioned, and that some parts of the society of this civilization is not wanting to pause, but other parts want to have this pause and this caring space for everyone, and for every process that it is emerging. So I have the call of taking care of these pausing moments for all, and for letting the power of Mother Nature in us, recognizing it in us, the three horizon in us, holding the safe space for ourselves and for others, and all together to let this liquidification to happen in a safe space. And doing so, bringing to our next step, which is evolution, which is we are evolving as a species, and all this regeneration of our connections and relationships with everything, ourselves and everybody, is bringing us to our next step, an evolutionary step. Whatever no linear, will happen in how many generations, but actually it is happening already. It is really happening right now. All of us listening to these words now or listening to the recording, we are connecting that energy. So just be with that for the power of our beings of life on earth. All my heart with all these connecting attentions and spirits right now. Thank you, and please, Hugo and Stuart, pass through a very nice closing for this.
Ugo, maybe you can share the 7 vortex you've created from today.
Totally. So thank you guys. I'm really, I keep learning, and I feel sometimes reflected also in your stories of having hard times. And I used to say now that in my job, there are very technological people around, and I say, well, I'm just coming from the valley of death, and I'm just getting out. So I'm really thirsty now. Like we really need to do this in such a way that we need to go beyond. So the first thing is that, well, this is what you could find in 7 Vortex. So you can go to 7vortex.com, and then you can find here our index. So in the index, we have 1 vortex per day, and so both of them are here. And this is first day, second day, and this is for the third day. So what I did is just to take a picture and to show it. How is it like all in white? And this is the first link that I shared. So you get familiar also with the process. And then from here, I can go to what I did. So let's start by this. I think for me, it seems like we are talking about radical harmony. And this radical harmony should be completely linked to the Mother Earth. There is a big opportunity in humanity to actually change behavior. And it seems to me more and more that this ecological niche that we are talking about as well, it is about maintaining the balance. So not breaking the system into parts. So this behavior, it is a common journey. And I think it's highly influenced by education. So the way that we put education to work, it is very, very important. And I think that's why we're all here. So education includes other forms of knowing, not just the way that we apply education right now. For my kids, just being outside in nature just gave them so many connections that they are already there, whether they go to the school and they became linear afterwards. What I did is just to also help them to use 7 Vortex in this way. So take it for your kids. I think if we maintain the balance, then there is a possibility also to co-evolve. And co-evolve is, again, because it is in our interest. It is a common journey. So we need to change our behavior to be able to co-evolve, to go through crisis, coexistence, and especially to coin our future in many ways, like to give shape to our future. And this future, for sure, has emerging properties. And this future is about transformation. This is what I listened from this conversation. So in nature, we see that nature actually adds a lot of energy in sensing. You have so many ways of sensing, like our own senses, but in each of the organisms that we see, there are sensors all the time. And this is why we became so techy about sensing things. And these sensors are about emerging properties. So sometimes the elephants, they can know about an earthquake or a tsunami that is coming because of the vibrations, because they have better tuned their senses for this specific vibration. Might be a matter of survival, actually, and that's why they are still here. So there is no more or less evolved species than all together sharing this space in the planet. So transformation, I really was struck, I think it was Karen, but it is on the compromise to move forward. So if we can get this compromise, and we can understand that the compromise takes sensing emerging properties, and that we have to shape our knowledge in a way that actually is informing and adding value, both like nature, the transformation, but also all these little bubbles here, like culture, love, deep listening. And if you understand the miracle of life, let's also talk about soul. And I think soul is one of these ingredients that, whether it's completely tangible or not, we all feel connected through something different, more energetic. So this is a big, deep discussion, but what about listening each other about this instead of just trying to make our points? Multi-generational cycles, liquidification in between cycles, metabolism, seasons, healing, reciprocity, molting. So molting is something that happens in the insects. So in the cicada, they actually leave their exoskeleton behind it, they push it, and they got wings after getting out from there. And I had the opportunity to have one of these cicadas in front of me and in front of my kid. And we saw opening this cicada. And I think that changed his whole perspective, whether he remembers the best or not. Just this miracle of life happens everywhere in nature. So I think we have also to honor this. And well, in the title, I use a shared purpose, because it seems with all these Bohmian also theories behind and all this quantum physics going and imagination happening at once, I think we need to focus on one shared purpose. If we can regenerate the earth for now, and then we move on, then we are making a big step. It is just missing this small little connection, like my behavior. Well, now it's about multi-generational cycles. Now it's more about deep listening. And if I make the difference one by one on this one, I'm trying to inspire others to have connectivity. So we can build this new horizon, and it can take shape from different perspectives, but they are all complementary to each other. And we need nature to keep all these narratives alive and to keep ourselves alive. So for me, it is really a line that goes up and that actually allows us to have clarity on what to do in a personal level. So thank you for that. And I will stay with this other part, that it is also about shared purpose. And some other thing that is saying here is that we are, where is it here? We are nested rhythms. So I like this part because I think life is a nested rhythm. So thank you everyone for this opportunity, and deeply honored to share the time and to hold the space together.
Beautiful, Ugo. Over to you, Jim.
Wow. I'm a little speechless at the richness of today. I just want to thank each and every one of you for everything that you've contributed to this dialogue. Ian, I really appreciated your description of the 3 different horizons. I think, we are all caught in some ways in all 3, simultaneously. Those of us who are at least spending time thinking about it. And that was a very illuminating presentation. And then Karen, I just want to say that PowerPoint, in addition to the poetic content, the photos, there's just the images were as potent as the prose. And the combination was truly, dazzling. It was very, very impressive. And then Hugo Lewis, add your comments on education. And I must say, as an educator, I mean, Ed and I are very similar in some ways. We founded universities, each of us, for essentially the same reasons. And that is to create something that will actually nurture young people rather than debilitate and snuff out their creative juices. And I watched it happen to my oldest son, who was intensely artistic, but just could not take sitting behind a desk all day and taking tests and memorizing information. His mind, his body just couldn't and wouldn't do it. And the very day, on the birthday of his 18th birthday, when he was legally a man, he quit school. He literally walked out. And I was so traumatized, having a PhD, et cetera, that I realized, there's something desperately wrong. And that was the catalyst, the irritant and the oyster, as it were, that led to the creation of Ubiquity University, which is dedicated to nurturing young people in a way that not only provides them wholeness, this radical harmony with Mother Earth, but also a skill set that they need to navigate an increasingly hyper-complex world when fundamental crises are about to wipe us out. And I keep coming back to this over and over in our sessions, that the scientists are all telling us that we're running out of time. So this program this week is, I believe, of seminal importance. And I'd like to close, just because I've been so inspired today, with a short poem from Rilke, just to salute and honor all of you who've been participating in this program. Rilke says, that time and time again in history, some special people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd. They move to broader laws. They carry strange customs with them and demand room for bold and audacious actions. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. They change the world. Time and time again in history, some special people wake up like you. They move to broader laws. They carry strange customs with them. They're speaking about the horizon beyond the horizon, beyond the horizon. And they demand room. And this is what I so admire about you, Ed, and what I admire about all of you. You're demanding room for bold and audacious actions that are going to transform the world. You can feel it in your beings. Why? Because the future is speaking ruthlessly through you. And that's why we're going to change the world. So thank you. Thank you. And tomorrow we're going to go even deeper in the thematic of evolution as bouncing beyond to regenerative economics continues into its fourth day. Same time, same station, 5:00 p.m. Central European time here on Zoom and on our live streaming partners. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant session. We'll see you all again tomorrow.